Welcome to our Suffolk Libraries Day online book festival. As a charity, our annual fundraising day is really vitally important to us, and we are always so grateful for your support and generosity. Thank you, everybody. I'm Lisa, your host for this week's book festival, and we are finishing with Elly Griffiths. How exciting is that? So welcome, Elly. Thank you for joining us.
Lovely to see you again, and how lovely to see so many people, so many participants coming. It's amazing. Hi, everyone.
We love you. This is it. And I wanted to start, Elly, by first saying I'm sure many watching would join me in thanking you for bringing us the Ruth Galloway books. You dedicated 15 years of your life to this series, and it's a wonderful series. I've got my little badge on. It's a wonderful series.
Ruth 15 badge.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I wanted to start with, we know the origins, most of your fans know the origin story of Ruth, that marsh where you saw her, but did you always know that she would end up in a crime book series?
Such a great question, Lisa, and thank you so much. What a lovely thing to say. It's kind of hard to believe there are 15 books, and I've written through 15 years, and through some quite big events in my own life, and I'm sure in the lives of my readers. So it does feel quite a big thing. Did I always know it would be a crime series? It's a very good question. I had the idea for the book, and I had already, as you know, Lisa, written a few books before under my own name, which a lot of you will know is Domenica De Rosa, which I know sounds made up, but is my real name. And they were sort of books about sort of family relationships, that sort of thing. And so when I wrote this one, I knew it was a little bit different, but I didn't totally see it as a crime novel because it had a lot of similar things to my other books. It had a strong female main character, had this sort of sense of place, I hoped, had the sort of themes of whether you should ever dig up the past and things. So I knew it had a crime element, but I didn't totally see it as a crime book. And it was really my agent who read it, and she said, happily, because sometimes your agent's not pleased with what you've written and they say things like, it's interesting. Have you got any other ideas? But she said, she said, it's crime. You need a crime name. So, that's how I became Elly Griffiths. And even then, I certainly didn't think it was 15 books worth. The publisher who had published my Domenica De Rosa books didn't want this, actually, because it was crime. They wanted me to keep writing my sort of family sort of romances. So we went to a new publisher, Quercus, who were fantastic, and there I met my wonderful editor Jane Wood, who's edited all the Elly books. But Jane was quite cautious, even though she did like the books, so she just bought 2 of them. So I knew there would be 2. So I didn't know there would be 15. I obviously hoped there would be a series, and it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I think it's only in genre fiction, in crime or sci-fi, that you get a series. If you write kind of literary fiction, which I suppose I was kind of doing before, you never get to write a sequel. You just leave your characters there. So I didn't really think it would be a crime series. So here we are at book 15.
And obviously you've touched upon your books before. You took on the Elly Griffiths persona as an author almost. What was that transition like, going into writing crime books and getting to know all these amazing crime authors and the world that you're now in?
It's been wonderful. I have to say, it really has been wonderful. I was always keen on reading crime, and in fact, my first book, which you and I have talked about before, Lisa, when I was 11, I tried to write well, I did kind of write, I guess it was kind of a long short story, really, rather novel, but it was crime. It was called The Hair of the Dog, and it was a sort of Agatha Christie-esque mystery. So I did always like crime and like reading about it, but it was a whole new world. And oh my goodness, crime writers are lovely. I never thought I would meet so many good friends at this point in my life, in my 40s and 50s. I never thought I would meet so many great people and sort of join this community. And as you know, Lisa, because you've interviewed most of us, it really is a community. Some of my best friends now, so Lindsay Thompson, William Shaw, they really come from this crime world, and it is a really great world. We're very supportive of each other, and I've discovered all these wonderful books, so it has been incredible. But yeah, is a whole new thing, really.
And you're right, they're so supportive. I think the literary world is a really lovely community, like generally. And one of the questions we had before the event was from Tanya, and obviously touching upon you starting a new genre and your previous publishers going, we would rather you didn't. She wanted to know, how did you get your work noticed by agents or publishers?
Oh, Tanya, that's a hell of a question, a really good question. And as everybody knows, I think it is quite difficult. I had worked in publishing, so I was an editor, but for children's fiction, so a different part of it. So, but I have to say that probably did help a bit because I kind of knew the path that you had to take, you know, and I knew that really you need an agent. If you want to be traditionally published, that is. Nowadays, there's so many other options to be published. You can self-publish, you can be ebook only, all sorts of. But for a traditional publisher, you really do need an agent. So I wrote to 6 agents, and I just somebody advised me to write to them, saying something like, but not, you know, not as blatantly as this, say something like, I'm sending you the synopsis and first 3 chapters. I'm sending it to 6 other agents, because one thing an agent can't stand is the thought that another agent gets a good new author. So I'm saying to 6 other agents, but if you don't come back to me by the end of a couple of weeks, I'll just assume you're not interested. And that seemed to be quite a sort of bold way of putting it, but actually it sort of worked, because 3 of them did come back to me and were interested, and I went to meet them, and I really just went with the agent I liked best. She was called Tiff Leonis at Janclo Nesbitt, and until very recently they were still my agent. So that did work for me, and I think it's important to remember that you're the one making the offer. You know, the agent will be nothing without new writers, so don't be too humble. Of course, don't be arrogant, but don't be too humble when you approach them. But of course, like everyone, like every writer on earth, I had my rejections. You know, that one was successful, so that led to my first published book, which was The Italian Quarter, as Domenica De Rosa. But before then, I had my rejections. I had one novel rejected for being, this is an actual quote because I remembered it, for being redolent, dare I say it, of the 70s. And I wouldn't have minded, but the book was set in 1975. So it was set in the 70s, but they turned it down for being too like the 70s, so who knows. So we've all had our rejections. So eventually applying to agents worked. I got a book published out there, but it wasn't until, you know, I published, I think 4 or 5 Ruth books until they started to sell really well. So as I'm sure everyone knows, it's quite a long game publishing.
Yeah, and it's so awesome that they've become so popular. And we've already talked about, you know, how Ruth began in your mind and when you saw her. But how about Nelson? Like, when and where did he come to you and become part of that creative mix that works so brilliantly?
Well, thank you, Lisa. Oh, I should really just say, actually, because you said it's great that they have become popular, but it was libraries. So this is why I love doing events like this. It was libraries and independent bookshops that really got me going, because it's in libraries. You know, something like you would say to a customer, oh, do you know what? I think you'd like, if you like Anne Cleeves, I think you might like Elly Griffiths. And really that's what it was, because it was so slow, word of mouth thing from libraries and independent bookshops. So first of all, I just want to remember to say thank you for that. Nelson, well, I always thought that Ruth, who's an archaeologist, an academic from London, would need a sort of antagonist, somebody to who would she could have a relationship with ultimately, but who would at first antagonize her and be kind of like her opposite. So I thought, as she came from the south, he would have to be from the north, which, you know, I'm from Brighton, so everywhere's north to me. But and I decided he'd be from Blackpool, partly because my brother-in-law Mike is from Blackpool, and I knew that Mike would then be able to give me some sort of local colour and some, you know, basically tell me where Nelson would have gone to school and where he would have, you know, played football and all those little bits that sort of help. So I decided to be from Blackpool for that reason. Also because my granddad was an actor who often performed at Blackpool. But I have to say Nelson's not Mike in any way. Mike is lovely in a different way to Nelson. So he's not Nelson. And I'm not sure where Nelson came from, but my editor Jane did say to me at one point, I wonder if Nelson's like your dad. And, you know, editors are very clever sometimes. I suddenly realised he was quite like my dad. In some ways, my dad was Italian, so he wasn't from Blackpool, but he was this quite a strong character. He was a racing driver, so he drove too fast. He was a family man. He was also quite impatient about some things, but you know, very loving in other ways. So I think there was a lot of my dad in Nelson. So yeah, partly my dad, partly my brother-in-law, partly from who knows where.
Thank you so much. And we've had a question as well, because obviously these characters have become beloved to us, as well as you. I mean, obviously as an author, finishing the series is a big deal, more so for yourself than all of us. And one of the comments we've had is, Elly, do you ever see someone who you think is a spitting image of one of your characters, like maybe Cathbad walking down the street, and go, ooh?
Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, I do occasionally, and I live in Brighton, which is quite an alternative place to live. So I do occasionally on Brighton, I sort of walking on the beach or something, might see somebody who I think, oh, that could be Cathbad. Or recently at a wedding, there was a wonderful best man who gave this most wonderful speech that was quite kind of magical. And I thought, wow, you are young Cathbad. But luckily I didn't say that to him, otherwise you'd have thought I was mad. But so occasionally I do. It is quite often Cathbad. But occasionally it's not so much the main characters, I have to say, I suppose, because they're quite fixed in my head. But I might meet Summer and I think, oh, you're a bit of a Tanya, or oh, there's a bit of Phil there. So occasionally, yes.
I love that. And Rosemary, who I assume is from the US, wanted to know when the last Ruth Galloway will be available there.
It's out on the 25th of April. I'm so sorry you have to wait, Rosemary, and it's really not me. It's because it's two different publishers. And having been a publisher, I do know how hard it is to sort out the schedule. So you have to get a slot for each new book. So we are trying to bring them closer together. I don't know if you remember, they used to be about 6 months apart. So now we're sort of trying to keep them sort of 3 months apart, sort of bring them closer together. But I know, because I always feel really bad for my American readers, because here I am talking about, oh, the book's out, here it is, and you have to wait, but not that long now.
I'm really glad you mentioned as well, like what goes on behind the scenes, because a lot of readers don't get all these different processes, that you need a slot to release a title, and you'd love everyone to have it all at the same time, I'm sure.
I really would, and it is quite difficult because you have to sort of get the right slot, and then you have to book that in with the bookshops, and so it actually is quite hard to know exactly when to produce a book. But we are trying now to bring the pub dates a little closer together, because it's just frustrating. I do understand that.
And we've had 2 questions, which I know is a common theme at your events, Elly, from both Ruth and Maddie, who want to know about a TV series. Please, please, please. And I know, again, as an author, there's only so much you can do. I think we need to start a campaign to get this happening.
Yeah, well, we do, because so the books have been optioned for TV several times. I think it's 5 times now. So that is when a company, and they're always quite, BBC, ITV, they've all been quite big companies, have say they want to put your book on TV, and they option it, so they sort of take it off the market for a couple of years where they work on a script or something. So that has happened to me now many times, and that they're offered really good scripts, really good treatments, but it just hasn't happened, and I really don't know why. And because I have to agree with the questioners, I think they'd be quite good on TV. I mean, I do understand as well that we're all readers, aren't we? Here, you and me, Lisa, everyone listening is a reader. So in a sense, the pictures are better in our heads, aren't they? But also, I would quite like to see them on screen. So I have to say that I share your frustration. And as you said, there's only so much I can do. But I have just signed, just in the process of signing with a new company. So I can't say very much more about that. But I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful. And these people are great, and they really invest in the books. Somebody was saying to me that they wondered whether people were put off by the archaeology, because there was quite an unsuccessful BBC thing called Bone Kickers. I don't know, about 10 years ago now. But I honestly think that the Detectorists is successful. People love archaeology. There are lots of archaeology programs. So I don't know why they haven't made it on screen, but you never know. It might happen.
And I'm looking through all the comments that are coming through. There were other people asking that. So it was lots of people, we want a TV show, which I totally understand. And Sarah's asked about your interest in archaeology and when that started, and if writing the Ruth Galloway series sparked that.
Yes, but in a way, it started before that. And I have to give a bit of credit here to my husband, Andy, because when I met Andy, he was a lawyer and he worked in the city. And we met in a city wine bar and all that. But he had always wanted to be an archaeologist, really. And I think he'd done law just because it was sort of safer option at the time, and had done really well in law, but had never really liked that sort of city world. So he'd always wanted to be an archaeologist, and I thought to myself, isn't that sweet? So we got married, not just for that reason. Let's have a sip of water. But then when we had 2 young children, Andy said to me, yeah, you remember that thing about being an archaeologist? I'd quite like to try it. So he went back to university and studied archaeology. And you know, it meant our lives had to change in lots of ways, all of them good, I have to say, because it meant Andy was home more and we saw more of him. And also we all became really interested in archaeology because he could tell us these fantastic things. We'd go on walks and he'd pick up these flints from the, and he'd say they could be from, you know, a Neolithic arrowhead or something. I'm probably getting all the terms wrong, but you know what I mean. He could read the landscape and tell us, you know, where he could see where there'd been settlements before, and he could tell us what had happened. And there's a wonderful hill near us called Mount Cabourn that would have had an Iron Age fort on the top. So absolutely fascinating. So we all became interested in archaeology, and of course it was a chance remark of Andy's that really inspired the whole series. We were walking across Titchwell Marsh, sorry, on North Norfolk, and Andy happened to say that prehistoric people had thought that marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea but something in between. They'd thought of it as a bridge to the afterlife, neither land nor sea, neither life nor death, and that's where you find bodies there, so-called bog bodies. Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. I'll say a few comments for a moment for you, Elly. We've got Lucy. Thank you for joining us. She's from Nottinghamshire in the Inspired Culture and Learning and Libraries, and said that all of her the borrowers are all huge fans of Elly. Right back at you, Lucy, for Suffolk. It's a common theme for library services, I think. And several people have been asking about what happens with Ruth and Nelson. So this is where you need to get the new book. So the wonderful thing about The Last Remains is that Elly addresses that relationship that they both have, the contentious, wonderful relationship in all these books that's beautifully brought together at the end of The Last Remains. So that those of you that are asking, does this happen, does that happen, I can't tell you, and Elly won't be able to tell you. You need to read the book. So I know if you're not in the UK, you may not have it yet, but that is something for you to look forward to. Someday soon you will find out definitively what happens with them, which is wonderful. And on to another question. We've got Joe, who asked, do you listen to the audio versions? Now I do, and she's asked if you have any involvement in them as the author.
No, I haven't listened to them. And just to go back to what Lisa was just saying just now, we have promised everyone, haven't we, that there'll be no spoilers tonight. So seriously, there will be no spoilers if you haven't read The Last Remains. But Lisa's quite right. You do find answers to the questions in that book. No, well, the audiobooks, I have listened to little bits of all of them. So, you know, I have a bit of involvement when a new reader is chosen. The audio bit of the publishers say, you know, that they play me little snippets of people's voices, say which one do you like, who do you think would be better. And actually, sometimes you do have some quite big decisions to make. And one recently was the Brighton Mysteries. I don't know if anyone listens to the Brighton Mysteries on audio, but they started off read by this great actor called Daniel Philpott. He was really, really good. But as the books have gone on, the female characters have got so much more important. So with the last book, The Midnight Hour, we thought, well, actually, it would be good to have a woman narrator. So we switched to a woman narrator. So sometimes decisions like that are quite important. You think, whose voice is this book in? And for example, again, with Stranger Diaries and Postcode Murders, they've been in different voices. So you have Harbinder, you have Claire, you have Georgie, you have different voices. So with the Ruth books, it's quite a long time ago now that we did pick Jo McDowell to be the narrator. And the bits I've heard of her, I've never listened to one all the way through, I have to say, but she seems brilliant. And Claire Colville took over for a little bit in the middle, and I also thought she was really good. So I have a bit of involvement, but I do admit I've never listened to one all the way through, and actually I really like audiobooks. Something a little bit, not cringe make, a little bit embarrassing about listening to your own stuff. I don't know. I don't know why. But during lockdown, I did decide to read one of my books, The Crossing Places, aloud on my Facebook page. So I read a chapter a day because I just felt we all needed a bit of comfort, and I loved being read to when I was a child. And I loved doing it, but it did make me realise, goodness, how clever these voice actors are, because it's very difficult to do. And they're my own books. I ended up reading 3 of them. But it was very difficult. So hats off to the Audible people. I mean, Lisa, have you enjoyed listening to them?
I love your book because I do listen to a lot of audio and I think they're brilliantly done. And I found it interesting when you said about it being weird, listening to your own things. And I've only ever seen one person say they love it, and it was an actor, Samuel L. Jackson, and he's like, oh no, if I'm browsing and it's one of my films, I definitely put it on. And well, that was really interesting, because I think most artists are a bit like, oh, I don't know, it's a bit weird to have my music in the background or listen to my own work.
Well, it's like the way your own voice sounds strange, doesn't it? If you listen to yourself. I'm doing this podcast now. It's called the Plot Thickens, which is hard to say, the Plot Thickens. And I really love doing it, but listening to your own voice is weird, isn't it? So I think it's a little bit like that, even though it's not your voice, it sort of is your voice, and it's kind of weird to listen to.
I know exactly what you mean, because you know we're starting a Suffolk Libraries one called Who's on the Bookshelf that's coming out in a couple of weeks, and I've been editing the audio and going, is that really me? So it's just really bizarre. And Sally, I wanted to touch upon, she went to Ixworth Library, had a raffle there. She won a signed copy of your book, and she is so excited. There is a lot of exclamation marks in this comment that she sent through. So I think she's made her weekend. And now she's here for this live event, which is wonderful. Catherine has asked about Cathbad, and how did he get his feet so solidly under the table in the Ruth Galloway books?
Great way of describing it, because he really did. I really don't know. Must be magic. It must be Cathbad magic. So in the first book, in The Crossing Places, he was really just meant to be a suspect. You know, another suspect. I hope an interesting one, and I'm particularly interested in sort of druidical religion and views. And I knew that, so The Crossing Places kind of is based on a real discovery of a henge, a North Norfolk, a Bronze Age henge. And when the archaeologist took the timbers away to be preserved and to examine them, local druids protested. I remember reading this in the papers, and I did think, only in Norfolk would you have local druids, probably Suffolk as well. I think definitely Suffolk as well. You would have local druids. So I was interested for that reason. I knew I wanted a druid character. Yes, he was only meant to be around for that one book. But I think he was a very interesting character to write about. And I really liked the way that he interacted with Nelson and Ruth. And I knew Nelson would be antagonistic to him at first, because he is antagonistic to a lot of people. But weirdly, at the end of The Crossing Places, there became this sort of strange friendship between Nelson and Cathbad. And I knew I wanted to write about that more. But and the third book, which is The House at Sea's End, Cathbad does something that I really hadn't planned, and that was when he became so established as a character. So goodness knows why he did that, but yet now he really has got his feet under the table. You're so right.
And he's beloved. Like, it's not just Ruth and Nelson people love, it's Cathbad. And Leah's said that they love the unlikely friendship that ends up between Nelson and Cathbad. And is that something that you anticipated from the beginning, or like what you were just talking about, did it unfold as you were writing the books?
Really did unfold as I wrote the books, and started really with that scene in The Crossing Places. But it has become one of my own favourite bits to write about, because I love that. I love writing about friendship. I guess, you know, love is great to write about, but friendship is really great to write about, and unexpected friendships, and we all have them, don't we, in our lives, and just those people who seem unlikely friends, but actually do connect on a really real level. So I liked that very, very much. I remember when I used to work in a library, like you used to work in a library, and one of the librarians, who was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, would always play chess with a local priest. And they had this great relationship where they sort of didn't agree on any of the sort of big questions of life, but they had this great friendship built on chess. And so I really loved those moments, actually. So that has been one of my favourite relationships to write about, really. Also, Ruth's relationship with Cathbad. I don't think sometimes isn't enough, I think, of friendship between men and women. You know, there's never ever been any you know, sexual attraction or a romantic spark between Ruth and Caspar, but they're very good friends. So I've enjoyed writing about that too.
And we had a question, because obviously, at least for now, The Last Remains is the last book in the Ruth Galloway series. Several people have been asking about that in the comments, and yes, for now, at least, that's what Elly said. But Brenda had asked, now you've finished the series, when you look back, do you have a favourite out of it, a favourite book?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, it is quite strange to look back, actually. I was kind of quite keyed up to write this one because I'd said, as you said, Lisa, I've given myself some wriggle room. I have just said it's the last one, but it is the last little bit. Well, I always like the one I've just written, and actually I got to say The Last Remains is really close to my heart because I wanted to tie up a lot of things in this book, and I do hope that I've done it, but I have a real soft spot for the Ghost Fields. I really like the Ghost Fields, which is book 7, I think. And I think I like it for a few reasons, but one of them is that I've always personally loved books where people get marooned in a house in the countryside, and I was a big fan of Georgette Hare growing up. Still am definitely. But my favourite ones of hers are like The Talisman Ring, where the protagonists sort of end up stuck in this little inn somewhere in the countryside. And so because there were terrible floods in Norfolk, which were genuinely awful, but they did give me a real pretext to maroon a lot of the characters in the spooky old country house. So that happens in the Ghost Field. So I think that's one reason why it is a personal favourite, although not a favourite for other reasons, because if you write anything about the war, you get 100 letters telling you you've got it all wrong. So that is the minor side of the Ghost Fields, but because it's about Second World War relics, and everyone has a view on those, but I do have a soft spot for that book.
And when we're talking about these beloved characters, Kate has asked, what sort of fiction, Elly, do you think Ruth would read herself?
Wow, good question. I think in the very first book I say she has really eclectic tastes, but one taste I have given her is a real taste for crime fiction, and she's a huge fan of Ian Rankin. She loves Ian Rankin, and I'm a big Ian Rankin fan, so that was very easy for me to give her that interest. She likes Ian Rankin, she likes Val McDermott, as I do too. I think she's given a Val McDermott book as a present at some point, so she really likes crime fiction and she likes serious fiction. So, but she's also got a bit of a love for children's pony books, which again, you know, is a little tip if anyone's looking for tips, is give your characters interests, even the strange ones that you have, because for example, Ruth is a big Bruce Springsteen fan because I am, so I never have to look up a Bruce Springsteen lyric because they're written on my heart, and I think we share that love, don't we?
Yeah, I saw him at Earl's Court in London many years ago, and he was
well,
phenomenal.
are you going to see him this time round?
No, how about you?
Yeah, I got tickets to see him, yeah,
Nice.
Hyde Park. But I've seen him, I think, every time he's been to the UK. Anyhow, sidetracked onto Bruce. But I've given Ruth an interest in children's pony books because I love pony books. So I think in The Last Remain, she's really, somebody picks up Jill's Gymkhana from her bookshelves, and Ruth's a bit embarrassed by this. But she loves that. She loves Georgette Hare. She's read Georgette Hare before. She loves Agatha Christie. So she's got a lot of, I think she's a woman with probably like a lot of us in this discussion, with very wide-ranging interests. She obviously reads a lot of non-fiction for work, but I think she'd just read anything. And I'm a bit like that.
Me too. It's like nice to have different books to read as well.
Yes.
And I just go through some of the comments. So we have Sarah, who says that she loves your books. I work with archaeologists, and her dad was a police officer from Lancashire.
Oh, wow.
And I'm originally from Lancashire, Sarah, so I imagine that's lovely. Maya has said she absolutely loves the audiobooks, and the narrator is fabulous. I agree, they're all done really, really well. And we had a question about the settings of the books. So Jan, who's got a special place in her heart for North Norfolk and knows it incredibly well, has said like the descriptions are so accurate in your Ruth Galloway series, and wanted to ask, did you spend a lot of time there writing and getting to know the places, or was that done sort of away from them for research, doing research instead?
That's a great question, Jan. Thank you. I'm so glad that you, especially as somebody who knows the area well, you know, really likes the descriptions. That really means a lot to me. Well, Norfolk is a place I've always loved, and I spent a bit of time there as a child because my aunt lived there. Got a beloved Aunt Marge, and Marge had a boat, has a boat, but she moored at Reedham in Norfolk, and we used to spend quite a lot of summers on Aunt Marge's boat, and you have great memories of really happy times with her. And she had some great stories. She was very good at ghost stories, so I think that Norfolk was in my head, you know, sort of linked with storytelling and slightly spooky stories at that, you know, even when I was young. So it always had a special place in my heart. And it's partly why the first book, The Crossing Place, is set in North Norfolk, but also because having decided to make Ruth an archaeologist, I kind of had to, there was really the best place for her was Norfolk, because I think Norfolk is the county with the most archaeology. It's incredibly rich history. The oldest human footprints outside Africa were found in Haysborough in Norfolk. It's been inhabited for a very long time. So I thought if I set the books there, I would never run out of history. I'd never run out of archaeology. I'd never run out of spooky stories. And I get to spend a lot of time there. So all those things have come true. So with every book, apart from the one that I wrote in lockdown, I have spent time in Norfolk writing them. I've never written about a place that I haven't been to. And in the most recent one, in The Last Remains, that there is a bit where she goes down the mines in Grimes Graves in Thetford, and I did do that to research the book. So she hasn't done anything, I don't think she's ever done anything I haven't done. So, you know, there is really, for me, there's no substitute for actually going to the place. But I don't live there, you know, I live in Brighton, but Norfolk has a special place in my heart.
And I think that's really awesome as a writer, because obviously writing the book can be quite a solitary experience, but the research and the finding out all the details beforehand, you go and visit loads of fabulous places and make notes. And we've got Shanna, who said that she's read your books in English because she sometimes finds it difficult to get them in the Netherlands. She hasn't been able to buy the new book yet, hopefully soon for you, but she just wanted to say that she loves the books, and Ruth and Nelson are like friends, which I thought was really lovely. And Sarah has asked, do you think Kate might be an archaeologist or a police officer when she's older?
Great questions. Oh, and thank you. I'm so touched when you said that they were like friends. That's such a lovely thing to say. And so the books are published in Dutch, but they stopped them after about 4 or 5 books, but now they've started them again. So they will all eventually be in Dutch, but I'm just in awe of people who can read in more than one language. So, you know, absolute hats off to you there. So, well, Kate, what an interesting question. I do think, I haven't quite decided what Kate will do. But it is one reason why I might go back to the books to find out what she does do. But I think she might do something that would surprise both of them. So I'm not quite sure what that would be. Don't think she'll be an archaeologist. She could be a police officer. And I don't think either of them would be too pleased with that if she did decide to do it. So quite sure what she'd do.
And apologies, I think I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly. Barbara has said, how did you get through writing process of 15 different books? And were there ever moments where you thought, I'm tired of this series and felt like giving up?
Oh, no, not really, I have to say. But I've written a Ruth book a year for 15 years, you know, and also I've written some other books. So I've been writing 2 books a year for about the last 7 years, I think. So it's a lot of books, I have to say. I never got bored with writing the Ruth books and never got fed up with them. But I think part of the reason for saying I'm going to draw a halt for now is that I don't want to feel like that. I want to sort of finish them where I'm so really enthused with them. So I've never, and writing's what I love doing, I have to say, and I would be doing it anyhow, even if no one wanted to publish it, I'd still be writing. So it's rather lovely to think that people do want to publish them and read them. So I feel very, very lucky. So yes, you know, when we're writing 2 books a year is quite hard going. You're always writing, you're always doing something. And of course, as we all know, it's not just the writing, it's the editing, it's the promoting, it's everything else that comes with it. You know, I know absolutely, you know that, Lisa, but it's been a great thing to do. But I might slow the pace a little bit now, but absolutely, just to reiterate, I haven't given up writing. I think I read something on social media, somebody put, I'm really sorry that Elly Griffiths has given up writing, which, so I just want to quickly say this isn't true at all. You know, I've stopped the Ruth series for now, but I'll still be writing at least a book a year. I've got ideas for new books. So, you know, I will still be writing.
And I mean, I can't believe anyone would say that. You've got another 2 coming out this year alone.
Yes,
And
it's true.
on that note, when Jan was asking about these wonderful places, there is a perfect companion book that's coming out, I think, in November for the Ruth series. Could you tell us a bit about that?
So you're so right to remind me as well, Lisa. Yes, 2 more books. There's a new Brighton mystery in September, and there's in November, there's a book called Ruth Galloway's Norfolk that's really going to follow all the places that are in the books, with some beautiful pictures and also a little bit of the stories that go with them, a little bit of the myths and folklore that I've gathered as I've written the books, and some personal stuff about how I came to write about Norfolk, and little stories about the places in the book. So that'll be, I think it's the 6th of November, Ruth Galloway's Norfolk, and it's going to be lovely, I have to say.
We've already touched upon the new book, the Brighton Mystery Series, which is going to be the 7th instalment after obviously the first book that you started in 2014, the series. What do we expect for that new instalment for that series?
It was called The Great Deceiver, and it's set in it. The book started with Zigzag Girl, which was set in 1950. But the great thing about writing in the past is you can kind of jump forward. So in only 7 books, I'm now up to 1966. So The Great Deceiver set in 1966. The world of variety theatre is kind of dead, except it exists in these kind of nostalgia end of the pier shows. And this book sort of centres on one of those. A magician's assistant is found dead, and the trail leads Edgar, the police officer, but also his wife Emma, who's now a private detective, to a group of magicians who centre around a very sort of strange character called Gordon Palgrave, who calls himself Pal. And in the 60s, he's reinvented himself as a great TV personality. And he has a show called Hug or Hit, where he either hugs or hits you, and both are awful, really. So the investigation centres around this group of magicians whose past does coincide with Max Mephisto's in some ways. So that's The Great Deceiver, and it's out in September.
So do remember to check that out, the 7th instalment of the Brighton mystery series. But that's not all you do. I mean, gosh, got Harbinger. I've got the proof copy, sadly, so the cover isn't quite right to show people, but Bleeding Heart Yard, that came out last year. Superb book. Those that haven't read it, read it. It's so good. Didn't see it coming. You had me going right up to the end.
Good.
And I wondered, like, when you've got all of these different books that you've worked upon, when you come up with an idea, the beginnings of an idea anyway, how do you decide who to place that with in the past? How do you decide if it's a Harbinger mystery or Brighton or Ruth? How do you do that?
That's a very good question, actually, because in fact, Bleeding Heart Yard, I'm so glad you liked it. Bleeding Heart Yard is a really good example of that, because Bleeding Heart Yard is a real place in London. And I went for a meal there some years ago now, in fact, with some old publishing friends. And I thought to myself, wow, it's a really interesting place, and what a great title. And it's this little courtyard in London. It's near London Bridge Station, but it's got some really interesting history. There was a murder there. It's mentioned Little Dorrit. You know, it's a real place. And I thought, oh, this would be good. And I sort of thought about, well, you know, could Ruth come to London for a bit? Could Max Mephisto be performing here? But that didn't seem right. And then what did seem right was that Harbinger, who was the detective in Stranger Diaries and Postcode Murders, would get promoted and move to London, and her first case would involve Bleeding Heart Yard. And that did just seem right. But you're right. Sometimes ideas come along and you think, well, who is that one for? You know,
Yeah.
who would? And sometimes what often happens with me is that I have several ideas and I write them down in my little ideas book, which is just, you know, write them down there, and I think, oh, I've got 3 ideas there, but actually they're all one book. So for Bleeding Heart Yard, I had an idea about a school reunion, and I had an idea about this actual place, Bleeding Heart Yard, and I had an idea about memory, about whether someone could convince you that you'd done something you hadn't done. So all those came together in the book. So sometimes you have several ideas and you think it's several books, but in fact it's just one.
And I love that you're really talking as well about going with your instincts as a writer to go, well, no, this is where it suits that story, and then like magpie all these different things in. And you know, you've also got your children's series, so you're looking at until recently, until at least the end of the Ruth books, 4 different series that you've been writing. How on earth are you doing that? And if you've done that to keep track of, you mean, you just showed your book of notes. Do you have loads of notebooks with the backstories and the different characters? How do you keep track of all of that?
I try and keep little notes, so that's at the front. It tells you the dates for all the books. So I try and keep dates of when people are born and when they die and things like that. But in some, it's not so difficult because they are just very different worlds that they inhabit. So, you know, the Ruth's world and Max Mephisto's world, and then Harbinder's world. Although Harbinder's nothing really to stop Harbinder investigating a case with Nelson. Oh, actually, come to think of it, what would that be like? But, you know, there's nothing to stop that happening, but they seem sort of separate in my head, really. So, and the Justice books are set in the 1930s, and again, it's a kind of different world. So I haven't had difficulty keeping them apart. But yeah, it is just generally, it is just finding the time. It really is finding the time to write only so many hours a day. And I find that I can only concentrate on writing one book at a time. So I couldn't write, I don't know, I haven't tried it, but I feel like I couldn't write a Ruth book in the morning and a Max book in the afternoon. I'd have to concentrate on one at a time. The only difference has been the Justice books, because I love writing those so much, and that's my children's series, certain murder mysteries for children. I've loved writing those so much. Sometimes I just write a Justice story on a Friday, you know, as a treat to myself. So even though the series, there are 4 Justice books now, and I hadn't planned to do any more, I sometimes do just still write a Justice short story just for fun.
I love them. I mean, I know they're for
Yeah.
children, but I know I'm not alone in your readers, Elly, that lots of adults are reading the Justice series because they're awesome.
So glad you said that. And actually, I honestly think that anyone would enjoy them, really. You know, I write them just for me, and really the only difference between Ruth and Justice is 12 years old at the start of it. You know, they are just kind of shorter Ruth books in a way. So absolutely, they're for everyone.
And when we've been talking about the Harbinger books, which are fantastic, we have got Maya from the US watching at the moment in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us.
Oh,
She
yeah.
thinks she loves the books. Her mother is a great character. That's so true. And she wanted to know, do you plan to write more of those in that series?
Would like to write another book about really centering on the characters this time who were in the postscript murders. You know, Harbinder's friends, Edwin and Benedict and Natalka. So I'd quite like to write a book with them at the centre, with Harbinder in too. So glad you like Harbinder's mum. So I have a friend who is very much from the same background as Harbinder. She's British Indian from a Sikh family, and her mum has really helped advise on the books. And so I do think the character of Harbinder's mum has come out more, the more that Balvinder has advised me, the more of Harbinder's mum there is in there.
And as well as doing all of that, and this is a proof copy, so the real copy in the bookshop is a white background. Ruth Ware, I interviewed on Monday, has also written a short story. You also did a Marple book, well, a Marple short story, if only. That would be amazing. Last year, what was that like? Because you're taking on existing characters that you didn't create. And I've got to say, that first sentence, for those of you that haven't read the Marple books, Elly's short story, that first sentence is amazing, completely hooks you in just one sentence. But what was that like, taking on this new world and new characters that you hadn't built yourself?
It was really fun, but it was quite scary in a way. So so the Agatha Christie estate approached 12 contemporary writers, but not all crime writers. There's me, wonderful Ruth, who you spoke to earlier this week, there's Val McDermott, but there's also Kate Moss, Natalie Haynes, the classicist, you know, Jean Kwok, all sorts of different writers, and asked them to write a short story about Miss Marple. And we were only given 3 things that we had to do. So we had to write about Miss Marple in Agatha Christie's world of her. So we couldn't write about the young Jane Marple, though wouldn't that be fun? I'd really love to do that. But
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Wouldn't it? But so you had to write about her as she is in Agatha Christie's books. She couldn't meet Poirot and she couldn't fall in love, which feels a bit sad. But then I can also understand that if Miss Marple fell in love, then that would be the short story, wouldn't it? So I can see that. So, and we had to loosely base our books on an existing Miss Marple story, and each one was meant to have a flower or a plant in it. I don't think everyone stuck to that, but mine is called Murder at the Villa Rosa, so there's a rose there, and De Rosa is my real name, Domenica De Rosa, so that's a little link there. And I actually really enjoyed writing my short story, and actually, Agatha Christie is so wonderful, such a genius. She does give you a lot of leeway, because a lot of the Miss Marple stories are narrated first person by someone else. So Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot never speak in the first person. We never hear them do that. So a lot of that, Murder at the Vicarage, for example, is narrated by the vicar. So I did the same thing. I had a different first person character, and in a way Miss Marple sort of appears in the background of his story, but then of course moves slowly to the foreground. So I think, and also the other thing that Agatha Christie did wonderfully for us was, goodness, Miss Marple gets around, doesn't she? I mean, she goes to the Caribbean, she goes to southern France. Her lovely nephew Raymond's always paying for holidays for her. So
I think we all need a
Raymond,
nephew called Raymond, to be
we
honest.
so do. He's always, and I think in this, just in this short stories, you know, she goes to New York, doesn't she? She goes on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
And in my short story, she goes to the Amalfi Coast in Italy, which is one of my favorite places in the world. My Italian family are from Naples, so it's a place. And I think it was just the end of lockdown, so we weren't really going anywhere. So I loved traveling to Italy in the book and putting Miss Marple there. And there's something about that quintessentially kind of English figure of Miss Marple in her tweed suit, sitting with Mount Vesuvius in the background at the Amalfi Coast, that was just irresistible. So it was a lot of fun to do, I have to say.
And that's Phil had asked about that as well, about experiencing that new world. But he also asked if you could write a short story, as well, a story actually based upon another fictional character. What would that be? Who would that be?
Oh, what a great question! Gosh, I'm getting so good. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit. Wow, I would really like to write about well, a couple of things come to mind. Some of Georgia Hayek's characters, I've always wanted to know what happens next. So, you know, I'd like to know what happens to Venetia and Damarel in the rest of, in Venetia, Georgia Hayek book. But also years and years ago, when I was about 16, I had glandular fever, and I read a whole series of books called the White Oak books, by somebody, Canadian writer called Maison de la Roche, and it's a family saga. And I would love to write about those characters from the family saga. I think they're all out of print there, but I bet Suffolk Libraries has them there somewhere. So I'd love to write about Rennie Whiteoak.
Thank you. It's a really good question, but it was one of those sort of pondering one, wasn't it?
Because there are characters that you love, but you don't much want to write about them, do you? Or you feel that their world is done. Like, for example, I absolutely loved To Kill a Mockingbird, but I never read To Set a Watchman because I felt that it was done in that book. But there were some characters you would like to write about more.
Do you know, I'm really glad you said that, because I was exactly the same. As much as it's one of my all-time favourite books, I just was like, I can't spoil what's come before. I didn't want to go into that.
And I sort of felt Harper Lee didn't really want to go there either. So yes, but I feel exactly the same.
And when we've been talking about things like Agatha Christie doing that amazing Marple short story, James had asked, what authors, past and present, do you take inspiration from as a writer?
Oh, great question. I think one of my big inspirations is Wilkie Collins. I'm a particular fan of Victorian fiction. I did a master's in Victorian literature, and my favourite writer is Wilkie Collins. I love his books. And I'm very much influenced, I know I am, by The Moonstone, which has a setting in a country house, but it's also on the coast, and it's near a place called the Shivering Sands. And there's some amazing descriptions in the book of the sands and how they're a character in their own life. They're quite a baleful character. And there's a wonderful line, what the sand gets, the sand keeps forever. And I think I quote that in The Crossing Places. So that sense of the place being a character, but also in The Woman in White, the way it's told from different viewpoints. I really love that. some of the characterization. There's a character, well, there's one in The Woman in White, I think is one of the best heroines ever in Marion Halcombe, but also one of the best villains in Count Fosco. And normally as an Italian, I don't like Italian villains, but I make exception for him because he's such a good villain. And there is a moment in The Woman in White where he not only reads Marion's diary, but he writes in it. Such villainy. And that was an inspiration for The Stranger Diaries. So definitely I've been influenced by Wilkie Collins, but also maybe by people like, I love Stella Gibbons, Cold Comfort Farm, probably by those long ago White Oak books, that sort of sense of a family living in the country, and sense of place, and sort of secrets running through families and things like that. Sure, I was influenced by Agatha Christie as well. Those, you know, as a crime writer, you think to yourself, I've hit on the most amazing, clever twist, and then you think, oh, Agatha Christie's already done that, actually. So sure, I was influenced by her too. Probably also by, you know, those pony books of yore. If I can get a pony into my books, I will.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. There are so many questions and comments coming through. The general theme, Elly, is you're awesome. So, and I'm trying to get through as many questions as possible. One of them I can't quite find at the moment because there's so many, mentioned upon you maybe doing a different genre. And I was really interested in that because obviously we've already talked about you previously published books in your real name. Do you think you would ever go back to that, to publishing in your real name, or would you ever explore a completely different genre?
What a really interesting question and thought. You know, I haven't ruled that out. I would love to write in my own name again. There's something about seeing a book with your real name on the cover that is really special, you know, I have to say. And I still don't totally react when people say Elly, you know, look round, who are they talking to? I've got a niece called Elly, which is also complicated because in our family she's Elly, not me, obviously. So I would think I'd love to write something that wasn't crime. I really would, yeah. And I'd like to maybe even write something that was more properly historical, or, you know, I love historical fiction. So yeah, all sorts of things. Science fiction, who knows?
I love that. And Fran has said, what about ghost stories? And someone else, Angela, asked about maybe a book on Nelson's childhood. So it's like the world is your oyster. You've like freed up a bit of your time, and we're all coming up with things for you to write about.
And what great ideas there are. There will be some short stories coming up, and they will include a lot of these little bits in maybe Ruth and Nelson's life that I haven't had time to tell you about. There'll be something about, you know, Max Mephisto as a young magician, Justice grown up. So that might be the time to fit in a couple of little ghost stories in there. It's a good idea. I love a good ghost story.
And I feel like, although I know it's been, a lot of fans have got upset about the current end of the Royce series, I also feel like it's a really exciting time for us readers as well, because I like to think it frees you up, Elly, to come up with some other new fabulous characters that we will love equally to Ruth and Nelson and Cathbad, because you've got the skill to do it. You do it in all your books. And one of the things that you talked to me about before is that a lot of authors, their first few books are never published, and they normally have some in the drawer. Now, what I've been really desperate to ask you is, do you have some in a drawer or on a hard drive somewhere that have never seen the light of day that you might go back to?
Really do. I really do. In fact, I could probably open a drawer here next to me. Here, well, look. This is my old science book. And there's a story inside it. It's a short story called Like Leaves on the Tree. So, you know, there it is, Leaves on a Tree. So yes, literally was one in my drawer there. So yes, I do. I do have a few that haven't been published. Yeah, no, I would love to. So one thing I'd love to do is to go back to that first story, The Hair of the Dog, which only a few pages of it exist now, and maybe rewrite it as a short story. I would really like to do that. That would be fun. Yeah, and also just thank you so much for what you said before, because I know some people were a bit cross with me for saying it was the last book, and I would just like people to be, instead of cross with me, maybe pleased that there have been 15 books, because that's quite a lot. And also excited about what's to come, because I do have loads of ideas, including ideas for new series and new characters.
Well, and we've already talked about some of your inspirations of your writers, like authors that you inspire you personally. But Angela asked, and I'm not sure if she's in this question, she's referring to your own series or other people's. She wants to know, what's your favourite book series?
Oh, okay. I'd find it quite hard to answer for my own, I have to say, because it's whichever one I'm writing at the moment. Although I do have this real soft spot for the Justice series, I have to say. Gosh, I think about crime fiction, as we were saying early on, is so many good series. I really love the Detective's Daughter series by Leslie Thompson. If you haven't read those, do yourself a favour and read them, because the main character, Stella Darnell, is a cleaner who solves crimes. She's a fabulous character. I really like William Shaw's Alex Cooperty series. I'm loving the new series by Val McDermott, the 1979 and now 1989 with Ali Burns. I think she's a terrific character. Phil Rickman, who writes a series about a vicar called Merrily Watkins, who's also the diocesan, hard word to say, diocesan exorcist. If you like your crime with a little bit of supernatural, then I would really recommend either Phil Rickman or James Oswald's Inspector McLean series. Both of those, I think, are terrific. So, and another one, going back to sort of historical fiction, is C.J. Sanson's Shard Lake series. Absolutely adore those books. So, I mean, I couldn't pick one out of those, but those are, you know, there are some terrific crime fiction series out there. So I would recommend any of those.
They're all, I agree, lots of ones that you were saying are just fantastic books. And I just wanted to go, there's a question about The Last Remains that I just wanted to pop back to when we were talking about at the beginning that I really liked, which was, is there a personal item or habit that you love or hate that you've ever added to a character in the background?
Oh gosh, that's a great question.
And if you
Personal
haven't, Elly might do that now.
Yeah, I might do. You know, you always put in a few of those things. So Nelson mentions in The Last Remains that he hates pumpkin flavored coffee, which I do, and those sort of abomination flavors, pumpkin or gingerbread flavor. So I put that in. And there's a few things. I think reading my books, you would see the things that I either love or hate. You know, I love Bruce Springsteen. I don't like pumpkin flavored coffee. So you would, but one of my favorites, I have to say, if you're allowed to have a favorite of your own, is that Tanya in The Last Remains says, "Why would anyone pay to listen to an author talk?" And I did laugh when I wrote that, because we're all different, aren't they? And we like that. Thank God people do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily pay, but thank God people do come to listen to authors talking. But I just loved writing about a character who hated the whole idea, couldn't understand why anyone would do that.
And I know exactly which bit you mean, because it made me laugh when I read it. I thought you were probably having a bit of fun putting that in. So I just wanted to add that Louisa said, how can anyone could possibly be cross at you, Elly? Obviously ending the series. And Ruth said that she loves the fact that Ruth and Nelson books have come to an end. It's sad, of course, but closure is a wonderful thing. And I would wholeheartedly agree, because I know Elly said before, there's only so long do they or don't they can go on before, you know, you've got to sort of bite the bullet. But I just, you know, we've run out of time. I know there's been so many questions. I've got through as many as I possibly could. So thank you everybody so much for joining us, and those catching up on the YouTube channel, those that sent the questions ahead of time and live. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And when this event ends, I almost picked up the wrong Elly book. I've got like a collection next to me. So when this event ends, you'll be sent to a link where you can purchase a copy of The Last Remains, which, if you haven't read it, it's fantastic. As they were saying, it resolves that ongoing thing with Ruth and Nelson. And, you know, Elly, thank you again so much for all the wonder you brought with your books. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You, Lisa, can I just say thank you, because you make this look easy and it's not. You've played a blinder for the whole of this online festival. You are terrific. Suffolk Libraries are terrific. Support libraries, guys, if you can. And thank you so much for everyone. It's been wonderful to see so many participants, just see the number going up there and to see so many questions. So thank you all very much.